A black woman was thrown out for being barren, discarded by her own family, left with nowhere to go. But just when she's about to give up, a billionaire pulls over and whispers, "You're coming with me." She's offered a life of luxury, but the truth is, he's searching for something real. And so is she. As their bond deepens, shocking secrets emerge, and suddenly they're both caught in a whirlwind of betrayal, past mistakes, and unspoken guilt. What happens when the past they've tried to escape comes crashing back, threatening everything they've built? Can love truly heal all wounds, or will the weight of their past tear them apart forever? Will they find redemption, or lose everything? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The evening air bit at Cynthia's cheeks as she stood on the cracked sidewalk outside her family home. The porch light that had welcomed her home countless times now cast harsh shadows across the weathered suitcase at her feet. Her mother's final words still rang in her ears, sharp and cutting like broken glass. "What good is a daughter who can't even give us grandchildren?" Tears blurred her vision as she stared at the front door, now firmly shut against her. The yellow curtains in the living room window, the same ones she'd helped her mother hang just last spring, twitched slightly, then fell still. Someone was watching her go, but no one was coming to bring her back inside. Her hands trembled as she gripped the handle of her hastily packed suitcase. Inside were just the basics she'd managed to grab. Some clothes, her wallet, her phone charger. The weight felt wrong. Too light for a life being uprooted, too heavy for her shaking arms to bear. "Lord, help me," she whispered, her breath visible in the cool evening air. The street lamps were starting to flicker on, one by one, like lonely stars in the growing darkness. The familiar houses of her neighborhood suddenly seemed alien and unwelcoming, their warm windows mocking her homelessness. Cynthia began walking, each step feeling like lead. She had no destination in mind. Her thoughts were a tangled mess of disbelief and hurt. The rhythmic sound of her suitcase wheels rolling over concrete joined the chorus of evening crickets and distant traffic. Past the Martinez family's house, where she used to babysit their twins. Past old Mrs. Peterson's perfectly maintained rose garden, where she'd often stopped to chat on her way home from work. Every familiar landmark now felt like a reminder of what she'd lost. Not just her home, but her place in this community. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Hope fluttered in her chest for a moment. Maybe they'd changed their minds. But it was just a news notification. She turned the phone off completely, unable to bear the thought of seeing her family members removing her from their group chats or unfriending her on social media. The weight of years of disappointment pressed down on her shoulders. All those negative pregnancy tests, the sympathetic looks from doctors, the whispered conversations between relatives that would stop when she entered a room. The gradual withdrawal of her parents' affection, as if her worth diminished with each passing month she failed to conceive. "You're 32 years old," her father had said earlier that evening, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Your cousins all have children by now. What are you waiting for?" "I've been trying," she'd pleaded, fighting back tears. "You know I've been trying. The doctors say—" "Doctors!" Her aunt had interrupted. "In my day, women knew their purpose. They didn't need doctors to tell them how to be proper women." The memory made fresh tears spill down her cheeks. Cynthia stopped walking for a moment, setting down her suitcase to wipe her face with trembling hands. A couple walking their dog crossed to the other side of the street, clearly uncomfortable with her obvious distress. She found herself at the small park where she used to play as a child. The swings creaked gently in the evening breeze, and the sight of the empty playground made her heart ache. How many times had she imagined bringing her own children here, pushing them on these same swings, teaching them to climb the monkey bars, kissing scraped knees better. Settling heavily onto a bench, Cynthia pulled her jacket tighter around herself. The temperature was dropping, and reality was setting in. She had some money saved, but not enough for a rental deposit. Her job at the local library paid modestly, and she'd always lived at home, helping with bills rather than paying full rent somewhere else. Her hand unconsciously drifted to her stomach. Flat, empty, betraying her in the eyes of her family. The physical pain of multiple fertility treatments was nothing compared to the emotional agony of being cast aside by the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. A distant church bell chimed 8 o'clock, its deep tones rolling across the quiet neighborhood. Cynthia watched as lights came on in surrounding houses, families settling in for dinner or evening routines. Through one window, she could see a mother helping a small child with homework. Through another, a family gathered around a dinner table, heads bowed in prayer. "Why?" she whispered to the darkening sky. "Why give me so much love to share and no child to give it to?" The park grew darker, and the evening chill deepened. Cynthia knew she couldn't stay here all night, but the thought of moving felt overwhelming. Her phone remained heavy in her pocket, turned off and silent, just like her family's love for her, apparently. Standing slowly, she grabbed her suitcase again. She needed to find somewhere to stay for the night, at least. Maybe Linda from the library would let her crash on her couch for a few days while she figured things out. Perhaps she could scrape together enough for a few nights at the budget motel on Mason Street. As she walked toward the park exit, a gust of wind stirred up fallen leaves around her feet. They danced in circles before settling again, like her scattered thoughts trying to find solid ground. The streetlights cast long shadows that seemed to reach for her, like grasping fingers. Each step took her further from the only home she'd known, from the family photos on the walls that would now tell lies about love and belonging. She wondered if they would take down the pictures of her, erase her from their family narrative as easily as they'd erased her from their home. The sound of children laughing drifted from a nearby house, and Cynthia quickened her pace. She couldn't bear to hear it right now, couldn't face another reminder of what her family saw as her failure. Her footsteps echoed off the buildings, a lonely percussion in the quiet evening. She pulled out her phone and turned it back on, hands shaking as she scrolled through her contacts. Who could she call? Who would understand? The list of names seemed suddenly short, full of family members who would no longer answer and casual friends who wouldn't want to be burdened with her crisis. A car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating her tear-stained face. The driver didn't slow down or stop, just another stranger passing by, unaware that they were witnessing someone's world falling apart. Cynthia watched the red tail-lights disappear around a corner, feeling more alone than ever. She found herself walking toward downtown, where the streets were a little busier and the lights a little brighter. At least there, her solitary figure wouldn't stand out so much. The wheels of her suitcase clattered against the sidewalk, a constant reminder of her sudden homelessness. Above her, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, twinkling with an indifference that made her feel small and insignificant. The same stars that had watched over generations of her family, generations that had managed to continue their bloodline, to fulfill what her parents saw as their primary purpose. Cynthia stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. Her reflection in a darkened shop window caught her eye. A solitary figure with a suitcase, looking lost and broken. Was this really her? Was this what her life had come to? 32 years of being a loving daughter, a helpful sister, a good person, all of it thrown away because her body couldn't do the one thing her family demanded of it. The walk signal changed, and she stepped off the curb, moving forward because standing still hurt too much. She had no destination, no plan, just an aching need to keep moving until something made sense again. The night stretched ahead of her, full of uncertainty and fear, but also carrying the first whispers of something else, a freedom she hadn't asked for, but might need to embrace. The motel room's ceiling fan clicked with each rotation, a steady rhythm that had kept Cynthia company through her sleepless night. Morning light filtered through thin curtains, casting shadows on the worn carpet. She sat on the edge of the bed, counting the remaining money in her wallet, barely enough for one more night in this place. Her reflection in the scratched mirror showed dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept more than an hour or two, tossing and turning on the lumpy mattress while her mind replayed yesterday's events over and over. The harsh words of her family still echoed in her thoughts, cutting deeper with each remembrance. "Get yourself together." She whispered to her reflection, trying to summon strength she wasn't sure she had anymore. Her hands trembled as she smoothed down her wrinkled clothes, the same ones she'd worn yesterday when her world had fallen apart. Outside, the morning traffic buzzed past the motel. Cynthia gathered her few belongings and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The sun felt too bright, too cheerful for how she felt inside. She began walking, her suitcase wheels catching on every crack in the sidewalk. Each step felt heavier than the last. Where was she going? What was she doing? The questions swirled in her mind like autumn leaves in a storm. She passed by a coffee shop where families sat together, sharing breakfast and laughter. The sight made her throat tight with unshed tears. "Keep it together," she muttered to herself, quickening her pace. "Just keep moving." But movement without direction was just wandering, and that's what she was doing. Wandering through streets that grew nicer and cleaner as she walked, not realizing she'd entered the city's more affluent area. Here, the sidewalks were smoother, the buildings taller and gleaming with glass and steel. A sleek black car slowed beside her, its engine purring quietly. Cynthia kept her eyes forward, trying to ignore it, but the car matched her pace. The passenger window hummed down smoothly. "Excuse me," a male voice called out, gentle but commanding. "Are you all right?" Cynthia paused, turning to face the voice. Behind the wheel sat a man in an expertly tailored suit, his expression concerned but guarded. Asher Knight studied her with dark eyes that seemed to see right through her careful composure. "I'm fine," she said automatically, the words feeling false on her tongue. A tear chose that moment to escape, trailing down her cheek and betraying her lie. Asher's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You don't look fine," he said quietly. "And this isn't the safest neighborhood to be walking alone with a suitcase." Cynthia glanced around, suddenly aware of how out of place she must look. "I'm just—" she started, but couldn't finish. "Just what? Homeless? Lost? Broken?" "Please," Asher said, "let me give you a ride somewhere, or at least buy you a cup of coffee." His voice held no judgment, just genuine concern that made her walls start to crumble. She studied him carefully. Everything about him spoke of wealth and power, from his expensive watch to his perfectly knotted tie. Under normal circumstances, she would never consider getting into a car with a stranger, but these weren't normal circumstances. And something in his eyes, a hint of understanding or perhaps loneliness, made her hesitate. "I don't," she began, her voice catching. "I don't actually have anywhere to go." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with their truth. Asher's expression softened slightly, and he put the car in park. "Then let's start with coffee," he said, reaching across to open the passenger door. "No strings attached, just a conversation and a warm drink." Cynthia stood frozen, her hand gripping her suitcase handle. Every logical part of her mind screamed that this was crazy, dangerous even. But what were her alternatives? Another night in that depressing motel room until her money ran out? "I'm Asher Knight," he offered, as if sensing her internal struggle, "and I promise you'll be safe with me." Something in his tone, the quiet sincerity of it, made her decision. Cynthia wheeled her suitcase around to the car door. "I'm Cynthia," she said softly, sliding into the leather seat that probably cost more than everything she owned. Asher nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Nice to meet you, Cynthia." The car door closed with a solid thunk, sealing her into a world so different from anything she'd known. The interior smelled of leather and some subtle, expensive cologne. Her suitcase sat in the back seat, looking shabby against the pristine upholstery. As Asher pulled away from the curb, Cynthia caught her reflection in the side mirror. She looked lost and small, but something else was there too. Maybe a hint of hope, or perhaps just the desperation of someone who had run out of options. The car moved smoothly through traffic, carrying her towards something unknown. Cynthia folded her hands in her lap, trying to stop their trembling. She didn't know if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or taking the first step towards something better. But at that moment, watching the city slide past the tinted windows, she realized she was too tired and heartbroken to care. Asher drove in thoughtful silence, occasionally glancing at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The distance between who they were, a wealthy businessman and a newly homeless woman, felt both vast and somehow insignificant in the quiet sanctuary of his car. The morning sun caught on the buildings around them, turning windows into mirrors that reflected back a world that had stopped making sense to Cynthia just 24 hours ago. Yet here she was, sitting in a stranger's luxury car, heading toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. The sleek car pulled up to a small cafe nestled between towering office buildings. Asher guided Cynthia to a quiet corner booth, away from the morning rush of business people grabbing their coffee. The leather seats creaked softly as they settled in. "Order whatever you'd like," Asher said, handing her a menu. His eyes studied her face with careful consideration. Cynthia's hands trembled slightly as she held the laminated page. "Just coffee is fine," she murmured, not wanting to take advantage of his kindness. "And something to eat," he insisted gently. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in a while." She couldn't argue with that. The events of the past 24 hours had left her too upset to eat. When the waitress came, Asher ordered them both full breakfasts, along with coffee and fresh orange juice. As they waited for their food, Asher leaned forward slightly. "I hope you don't find this too forward, but I'd like to offer you something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I have a large house, too large, really, for just one person. There's a guest wing that's never used. You're welcome to stay there while you figure things out." Cynthia's eyes widened. I couldn't possibly—" she started, but Asher held up a hand. "You can," he said firmly. "The space is just sitting there empty. It would be a waste not to use it when someone needs it." Their food arrived, steaming plates of eggs, bacon, and toast creating a momentary distraction. Cynthia's stomach growled at the sight, reminding her how hungry she was. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked, picking up her fork with uncertainty. Asher's expression softened, a flash of something vulnerable crossing his features. "Because I know what it's like to feel alone," he said quietly. "And sometimes people need a chance to catch their breath before they can move forward." As they ate, Asher told her about his home, describing it in a way that seemed almost apologetic for its grandeur. Cynthia listened, torn between overwhelming gratitude and nagging disbelief at this turn of events. After breakfast, they drove through the city's wealthiest neighborhood, where mansions sat back from the street behind elaborate gates. Asher's car turned into one of these driveways, and Cynthia's breath caught at the sight of his home. The mansion was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all clean lines and vast windows surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. As they pulled up to the front entrance, Cynthia felt increasingly out of place. "It's a bit much, I know," Asher said, noting her expression. "But it's home." He helped her with her suitcase, leading her through grand double doors into a foyer that could have fit her entire family's house. "The guest wing is this way," he explained, leading her down a hallway with high ceilings and artwork that probably cost more than she'd ever earn in her lifetime. "You'll have complete privacy here. There's a separate entrance and your own living space." The guest suite was larger than any apartment Cynthia had ever seen. A sitting room opened onto a bedroom with a king-sized bed, and the bathroom featured a shower that could have fit 5 people. "Make yourself at home," Asher said, setting her suitcase down. "There's a fully stocked kitchen down the hall, and Mrs. Peterson, my housekeeper, comes in 3 times a week. She can help you with anything you need." Cynthia turned in a slow circle, overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding her. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't need to," Asher replied. "Just take the time you need to heal and figure out your next steps." As evening approached, Cynthia had showered and changed into fresh clothes. She found herself wandering into the main part of the house, drawn by soft, classical music playing from somewhere. She found Asher in what appeared to be a study, sitting in a leather armchair with a glass of wine. He looked up as she entered, gesturing to another chair nearby. "Would you like to join me? There's plenty of wine." Cynthia settled into the chair, accepting the glass he poured her. The room was warm and comfortable despite its grandeur, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a view of the sunset through large windows. "This must seem strange to you," Asher said after a while, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Having a stranger in your home?" Cynthia clarified. Asher smiled slightly, swirling the wine in his glass. "Perhaps. But this house has been empty for too long. It needs some life in it." Something in his tone made Cynthia look at him more closely. Despite his wealth and success, there was a loneliness about him that resonated with her own. She recognized it in the way his eyes sometimes drifted to the middle distance, lost in thoughts he wouldn't share. "Do you live here all alone?" she asked softly. "Yes," he answered, then added after a pause, "It wasn't always the plan, but life has a way of taking unexpected turns." The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, creating a strangely intimate atmosphere. They sat together, 2 broken people finding an unexpected moment of peace in each other's company. The classical music played softly in the background, filling the spaces between their quiet conversation. As night fell, they shared simple stories, nothing too personal, nothing too deep, but there was an understanding building between them, a recognition of shared pain despite their vastly different circumstances. Cynthia found herself relaxing, the weight of her recent trauma feeling slightly lighter in this peaceful moment. Asher spoke about his business ventures, but his words lacked the pride one might expect. Instead, there was an undercurrent of emptiness, as if all his success had failed to bring him what he truly wanted. Cynthia listened, recognizing that beneath his polished exterior was someone just as lost as she was, just in a different way. The evening stretched on, comfortable and quiet, neither of them feeling the need to fill every moment with words. There was something healing about simply being in the presence of someone who asked nothing of you, who had no expectations to fulfill. When Cynthia finally stood to return to her room, Asher rose as well. "Thank you," she said simply, meaning far more than just the wine and conversation. "You're welcome," he replied, understanding in his eyes. "Good night, Cynthia." As she walked back to the guest wing, Cynthia felt something she hadn't expected, a small spark of hope. In this strange turn of events, in this unlikely sanctuary, perhaps she could find the strength to rebuild her life. And perhaps, though neither of them knew it yet, they had both found something they desperately needed, someone who could see past their broken pieces to the person underneath. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Asher's mansion, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Cynthia woke early, still adjusting to the unfamiliar surroundings of her new temporary home. The bed was softer than any she'd ever slept in, the sheets smoother than silk against her skin. Yet despite the luxury, she felt a need to be useful, to give something back. She made her way to the kitchen, where Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper, was already preparing breakfast. The older woman's kind face brightened at seeing her. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Peterson said warmly. "Would you like some coffee?" "Yes, please," Cynthia replied, then hesitated before adding, "And would you like some help?" Mrs. Peterson's eyes crinkled with a smile. "That would be lovely. You can start by setting the table." Over the next few days, Cynthia fell into a routine. She'd wake early, help Mrs. Peterson with breakfast, and then find small ways to make herself useful around the massive house. She organized bookshelves in the library, arranged fresh flowers in the sitting rooms, and even helped with the laundry, despite Mrs. Peterson's protests that it wasn't necessary. "You don't have to do any of this," Asher said one morning, finding her carefully dusting the collection of art pieces in the main hall. "You're my guest, not my staff." Cynthia paused, duster in hand. "I know, but it helps me feel purposeful, like I'm not just taking up space." Something in her words seemed to resonate with Asher. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, watching her with an unreadable expression. "I understand that feeling more than you might think." Their conversations began to grow longer and deeper. Often in the evenings, they would find themselves in his study, sharing stories over tea or wine. Asher spoke about his business empire, but there was always a hollow note in his voice when he discussed his achievements. 20 years ago I had nothing," he told her one evening, staring into his wine glass. "I built everything from scratch. Every deal, every acquisition, every success. I thought each one would finally make me feel complete. But it never did." Cynthia watched him from her now familiar spot in the leather armchair. "Success doesn't always fill the spaces inside us," she said softly. "No," he agreed, meeting her eyes. "It doesn't." As the days passed, Cynthia began to see beyond Asher's wealthy facade. She noticed how he would sometimes stand at the window of his study, looking out at nothing in particular, lost in thoughts that seemed to weigh heavily on him. She saw how he ate his meals alone when she wasn't there, despite having a dining room that could seat 20 people. She observed the way he spoke to his staff, always polite, but distant, as if afraid to form real connections. One afternoon, while helping Mrs. Peterson fold linens, Cynthia gathered the courage to ask about him. "Has Mr. Knight always been so solitary?" Mrs. Peterson's hand stilled on the sheet she was folding. "He's always been kind, but lonely. All these years I've worked here, I've never seen him truly happy. Until recently, that is." "Recently. Since you arrived, dear. He seems lighter somehow." The words stayed with Cynthia as she went about her day. She found herself paying more attention to the small changes in Asher's behavior, how he'd started taking his breakfast in the kitchen instead of his office, how his smile reached his eyes more often, how he seemed to find reasons to be in whatever room she was working in. During their evening conversations, Asher began sharing more personal details about his life. He spoke about growing up with nothing, about the drive that pushed him to succeed, and about the emptiness that success had brought. "Sometimes I look around at all of this," He gestured to the grandeur surrounding them. "And wonder if I built it all just to hide from what I really wanted." "What did you really want?" Cynthia asked gently. Asher was quiet for a long moment. "Connection. Family. Something real." He looked at her then, his eyes vulnerable. "The things money can't buy." Cynthia understood that feeling all too well. Her own loss of family, though recent and painful, echoed his long-term loneliness. In these quiet moments, they found themselves sharing not just conversation, but understanding, a recognition of shared pain that transcended their different circumstances. As days turned into a week, their routine became comfortable, almost domestic. They would share meals, discuss their days, and find moments of quiet companionship in the evening hours. The massive mansion began to feel less like a museum and more like a home filled with small touches of life. Fresh flowers Cynthia arranged, books left open on side tables, 2 cups of coffee sitting side by side on the kitchen counter. The staff noticed the changes, too. The house seemed warmer somehow, more lived in. Mrs. Peterson often caught Asher smiling to himself when he thought no one was looking, and the tension that usually hung around him had begun to ease. One evening, as they sat in their usual spots in the study, Asher turned to Cynthia with unusual hesitation in his voice. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that you can stay here as long as you need. There's no pressure to leave or figure everything out quickly." Cynthia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for the place to stay, but for seeing me. Really seeing me. You see me too." He replied quietly. "That's rarer than you might think." In that moment, they both recognized something shifting between them, a deepening of their connection that went beyond mere friendship or gratitude. They were 2 lonely souls who had somehow found understanding in each other's company, each filling a void in the other's life they hadn't even known existed. The evening light faded outside the windows, but neither made a move to turn on more lamps. They sat in the growing darkness, comfortable in their shared silence, each lost in thoughts about how unexpected life could be, how sometimes the greatest connections could form in the midst of our deepest loneliness. The afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the mansion's manicured lawn as Cynthia walked through the garden. She had spent the morning helping Mrs. Peterson with household tasks, but now found herself with a few quiet hours to herself. The garden had become her favorite retreat, its peaceful atmosphere providing a stark contrast to the turmoil of her recent past. She paused to admire a cluster of pink roses, their petals still damp from the morning's watering. A cool breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the sweet scent of blooming flowers. As she looked up at the mansion's imposing structure, her eyes were drawn to Asher's study window on the 2nd floor. She had never been in there alone before, always respecting his private space. But today, something pulled her toward it. Maybe it was curiosity about the man who had shown her such kindness, or perhaps it was the gentle way he had begun to open up to her over the past week. The study door was slightly ajar when she reached it. Cynthia hesitated at the threshold, her hand hovering over the polished wooden door handle. The room was empty, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto leather-bound books and elegant furniture. She stepped inside, feeling like an intruder in this personal space. Her attention was caught by a leather-bound album lying on a side table. It seemed out of place among the carefully organized business documents and books. The cover was slightly worn, suggesting it had been handled often. Cynthia's fingers traced the edge of the album. She knew she shouldn't look, but something about it called to her. With careful movements, she opened it, the leather creaking softly. The first page revealed a younger Asher, perhaps in his mid-20s. His face was softer then, his smile more carefree. He stood next to a beautiful young woman with long, dark hair and kind eyes. They looked happy together, their bodies turned toward each other in a way that spoke of intimacy and comfort. As she turned the pages, she found more photos of them together, at a park, at what looked like a company party, in casual moments that captured their evident happiness. Then she saw something that made her breath catch, a photo of the same woman holding a baby, with Asher standing beside them, his face a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. That was taken 15 years ago. Cynthia jumped at the sound of Asher's voice, nearly dropping the album. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, closing the album quickly. "I shouldn't have." "It's okay," Asher said quietly, walking into the room. He moved to stand beside her, taking the album and opening it again to the photo she had been looking at. "Her name is Harriet. She worked here as a maid when I was just starting to build my company." Cynthia watched his face as he looked at the photo, noting the mix of emotions that crossed his features. "The baby," she began hesitantly. "My son," Asher said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jordan." He sank into a nearby armchair, still holding the album. "I didn't know about him until after Harriet left. She never told me she was pregnant." Cynthia sat in the chair across from him, sensing that he needed to talk about this. "What happened?" Asher's fingers traced the edge of the photo. "We fell in love. It was unexpected. She was part of the household staff, and I was focused on building my empire. But she saw past all that. She saw me." He paused, swallowing hard. "We kept our relationship secret. I told myself it was to protect her position, but really, I was afraid of what people would say about a businessman dating his maid." The pain in his voice was palpable. Then one day she was gone, left a note saying she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't be someone's secret. I was too caught up in my own ambition to go after her. His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't find out about Jordan until 3 years later, when her sister contacted me." Cynthia felt her heart ache for him. "Did you ever meet him?" "Once," Asher replied, turning to another page that showed a young boy with his mother's smile and Asher's eyes. "I set up a trust fund for him, made sure they were taken care of financially. But I couldn't bring myself to be part of their lives. I told myself it was better that way, that I would only complicate things." He closed the album gently. "I've regretted that decision every day since." The room fell silent as Cynthia absorbed this revelation. So much about Asher made sense now. His isolation, his reluctance to form deep connections, the sadness that sometimes clouded his eyes when he thought no one was looking. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "It must be hard to carry this alone." Asher looked up at her, his eyes vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "You're the first person I've told about this in years," he admitted. "The staff knows, the ones who are here then, but we never speak of it." "Is that why you helped me?" Cynthia asked carefully. "Because you understand what it's like to lose family." "Maybe partly," he acknowledged. "But mostly I helped you because I saw something in your eyes that day. A kind of pain I recognized." He set the album aside and leaned forward slightly. "I've spent years building walls around myself, Cynthia, but somehow you've managed to see through them." The afternoon light had shifted, casting long shadows across the study floor. In this moment of shared vulnerability, something deeper seemed to pass between them, an understanding that went beyond words, a recognition of shared pain and the possibility of healing. "Do you ever think about reaching out to them?" Cynthia asked gently. Asher's gaze drifted to the window, where the garden stretched out below. "Every day," he admitted. "But after so many years, I wouldn't know where to begin." The weight of his confession hung in the air between them, a testament to the trust he had placed in her. Cynthia realized that in sharing this secret, Asher had given her a glimpse of his true self, not the successful businessman the world saw, but the man who carried the burden of his past choices with quiet regret. The morning sun streamed through the mansion's tall windows as Cynthia made her way down the hallway. After nearly 2 weeks of living here, she had finally started to memorize the layout of this enormous house. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished marble floors as she headed toward the kitchen, drawn by the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread. She found Harriet there, methodically organizing breakfast items on a silver tray. The maid looked up and offered a gentle smile. "Good morning, Miss Cynthia. Would you like some coffee?" "Please, just Cynthia," she replied, settling onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. "And yes, coffee would be wonderful." Harriet moved with practiced grace, pouring a steaming cup and adding just the right amount of cream. She had already learned how Cynthia liked it. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Cynthia admitted. She watched as Harriet continued her morning routine, noticing how the older woman seemed to know exactly where everything belonged. There was something calming about her presence, a quiet strength that reminded Cynthia of her grandmother. The peaceful morning routine was interrupted by the patter of small feet. A young boy, no more than 5 years old, came rushing into the kitchen. His dark curls bounced as he ran straight to Harriet, wrapping his arms around her legs. "Mama, can I have pancakes?" His bright eyes sparkled with hope. Harriet's whole demeanor softened as she looked down at her son. "Jordan, what did we say about running in the house?" Her tone was gentle despite the correction. "And good morning to you too, young man." Jordan giggled and properly greeted his mother, then turned to notice Cynthia. His shy smile was absolutely charming. "Hello," he said, suddenly remembering his manners. "Hello, Jordan," Cynthia responded warmly. "I'm Cynthia. I've been staying here for a little while." "I know," he said matter-of-factly. "Mama told me. She says you're nice." Harriet busied herself with making Jordan's pancakes, but Cynthia caught the slight flush on her cheeks. "Jordan, why don't you sit at the table? Breakfast will be ready soon." As Jordan climbed onto a chair, Cynthia couldn't help but study his features. There was something familiar about them, especially around his eyes, but she couldn't quite place it. She watched as Harriet interacted with her son, noting the deep bond between them. "Would you like to join us?" Harriet offered, surprising Cynthia with the invitation. "There's plenty of batter." "I'd love to," Cynthia replied, moving to the small table where Jordan sat. Over breakfast, she learned more about the little family. Jordan attended kindergarten at a nearby school, and Harriet arranged her work schedule around his needs. Mr. Knight, Asher, had been very accommodating, allowing Jordan to stay in the staff quarters with his mother instead of requiring Harriet to live off-premises like most of the other staff. Throughout the morning, Cynthia noticed small moments that piqued her curiosity. The way Harriet tensed slightly when Asher's name was mentioned. The careful way she answered questions about Jordan's father, saying only that he wasn't in the picture. The fact that Jordan seemed to know his way around the mansion as if he'd grown up here. Later that day, Cynthia found herself helping Harriet with some light cleaning in the library. As they worked, she observed how Harriet's eyes would linger on certain photographs, particularly ones of Asher from years ago. There was something in her gaze, not quite longing, but definitely more than the casual interest of an employee. "How long have you worked here, Harriet?" Cynthia asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Harriet paused in her dusting. "On and off for about 6 years now," she replied carefully. I took some time away when Jordan was born. And Mr. Knight has always been good to you both? Yes, Harriet said softly. He's been very generous. Just then, Asher himself appeared in the doorway. The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. Harriet's posture stiffened, and she quickly resumed her cleaning. Asher's expression was difficult to read as his eyes moved from Harriet to Jordan's toy car, forgotten in the corner of the room. "Harriet," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "could you make sure the dining room is ready for dinner? I'm expecting some business associates this evening." "Of course, Mr. Knight." Harriet gathered her cleaning supplies and left the room, her movements quick and efficient. Cynthia couldn't help but notice how Asher's gaze followed Harriet as she left, a mix of emotions crossing his face before he schooled his features back into their usual composed expression. The tension between them was almost tangible, like a tightly wound spring waiting to release. Throughout the day, Cynthia found herself paying more attention to these subtle interactions. She noticed how Asher and Harriet seemed to orbit each other, always maintaining a careful distance. When their paths did cross, their exchanges were unfailingly polite, but laden with an undercurrent of something unspoken. During dinner preparation, Jordan wandered into the kitchen again, this time clutching a drawing. He proudly showed it to Cynthia, a picture of what appeared to be his family. There was Harriet, clearly identifiable by the smile Jordan had captured perfectly. But what caught Cynthia's attention was the tall figure standing next to Harriet in the drawing, wearing what looked like one of Asher's signature suits. "Is that Mr. Knight?" she asked gently. Jordan nodded, then looked around conspiratorially before whispering, "Mommy says he's my daddy, but it's a secret." Before Cynthia could process this revelation, Harriet appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Jordan, sweetheart, it's time for your bath." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she ushered her son out of the kitchen. Cynthia sat there, stunned by this piece of information that suddenly made everything make sense. The familiar features she'd noticed in Jordan, the tension between Asher and Harriet, the generous arrangements for their living situation. She thought back to the photo album she'd discovered earlier, and the pieces began falling into place. The complexity of the situation overwhelmed her. Here was Harriet, quietly raising her son in the same house as his father, maintaining a professional distance that must cost her dearly. And Asher, living with the knowledge of his son so close, yet separated by walls of propriety and past decisions. As she helped set the table for Asher's business dinner, Cynthia's heart ached for all of them, for Harriet's quiet strength, for Jordan's innocent love, and for Asher's carefully maintained facade. She understood now why the atmosphere in the mansion sometimes felt heavy with unspoken words and hidden emotions. The evening drew to a close, and Cynthia found herself in the garden, watching as Jordan played with his toys on the lawn, while Harriet supervised from nearby. Asher stood at his study window, his silhouette visible against the warm light inside. The scene before her was both beautiful and heartbreaking. A family connected by blood and history, yet separated by circumstances and choices made long ago. The evening air was growing cool as Cynthia sat on the mansion's back porch, watching Jordan play with his toy cars on the stone path. The setting sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. She had grown fond of these quiet moments with the little boy, whose infectious energy and pure heart brought warmth to the grand but often lonely house. Vroom, vroom. Jordan zoomed his favorite red car along the path, making enthusiastic engine noises. His dark curls bounced as he crawled around, completely absorbed in his imaginary racetrack. Cynthia smiled, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. "Who's winning the race, Jordan?" "The red one," he exclaimed, holding up the shiny toy car. It's just like the one in Daddy's garage." Her heart skipped a beat at his casual mention of Daddy, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. She had noticed similarities between Jordan and Asher before, the same determined set of their jaw, the identical way they furrowed their brows when concentrating, but had dismissed them as coincidence. Jordan abandoned his cars and climbed onto the porch swing beside her, his small legs dangling. "Can you push me?" he asked, looking up at her with those familiar dark eyes. "Of course, sweetie." Cynthia stood and gave the swing a gentle push. The chains creaked softly as Jordan giggled, clearly delighting in the simple pleasure. The glass doors behind them slid open, and Asher stepped out onto the porch, his tie loosened after a long day of meetings. He looked tired, but managed a small smile at the scene before him. That's when it happened. Jordan's face lit up at the sight of Asher, and with the uninhibited honesty of a child, he announced, "Mommy says you're my daddy." The words hung in the air like suspended crystals, catching the last rays of sunlight and scattering them into sharp, brilliant points. Cynthia's hand froze mid-push, the swing slowing to a gentle sway. She felt as though all the air had been sucked from her lungs. Asher's reaction was immediate and visceral. His face drained of color, and his body went rigid. The casual stance he'd maintained vanished, replaced by a tense, almost defensive posture. His eyes darted between Jordan and Cynthia, a mix of panic and shame crossing his features. "Jordan," he said, his voice strained, "why don't you go find your mother? It's almost time for dinner." But Jordan, oblivious to the tension he'd created, continued swinging his legs happily. "Can we eat together tonight? Like a real family?" Cynthia's mind raced, trying to process this revelation. The photo album, the strange dynamics between Asher and Harriet, the careful distance they maintained, it all suddenly made terrible sense. She felt her chest tighten with a complex mix of emotions, confusion, hurt, and something that felt remarkably like betrayal. "Jordan." Asher tried again, more firmly this time. "Please go inside now." The little boy's face fell slightly at Asher's tone, but he hopped off the swing and headed towards the door. As he passed Asher, he reached up and grabbed his hand for just a moment, an innocent gesture that made Asher flinch visibly. Once Jordan was inside, a heavy silence descended on the porch. The swing continued its gentle motion, the chains squeaking softly like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. "Cynthia," Asher began, running a hand through his hair. "I can explain." "Can you?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like there's quite a lot you've neglected to mention." Asher moved to the porch railing, gripping it until his knuckles turned white. "It's complicated?" "Complicated?" Cynthia let out a hollow laugh. "You have a son, Asher. A son who lives in your house, who you see every day, and you've been pretending he's just your maid's child. How long did you think you could keep this secret?" "I wasn't—" he started, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. "I never meant for any of this to happen." The sun had almost completely set now, casting long shadows across the porch. In the dimming light, Asher looked older, more vulnerable than Cynthia had ever seen him. The carefully constructed facade of the confident billionaire was crumbling before her eyes. "Does he know?" she asked softly. "Does Jordan understand who you really are to him?" Asher's shoulders slumped. "I don't know what Harriet has told him. We never discussed how to handle this. It was easier to just—" "Easier?" Cynthia felt anger rising in her chest. "Easier for whom? Certainly not for Jordan, growing up watching his father pretend to be nothing more than his mother's employer. Not for Harriet, having to maintain this charade day after day." Through the glass doors, they could see Jordan in the kitchen with Harriet, helping her set the table for dinner. The domestic scene felt like a cruel joke now, knowing the truth that lay beneath it. "I've made mistakes," Asher admitted, his voice barely audible. "More than I can count, but I've tried to provide for them, to make sure they're taken care of." "Money isn't everything, Asher." Cynthia cut him off. "That little boy in there doesn't need your provision as much as he needs his father's love." The words seemed to hit Asher like a physical blow. He turned away from the door, unable to watch the scene inside any longer. The carefully maintained distance he'd kept from his son suddenly seemed less like protection and more like cowardice. Cynthia wrapped her arms around herself, feeling chilled despite the mild evening air. The man before her seemed like a stranger now, so different from the person she thought she was getting to know. The weight of this secret, of the unspoken truth that had been living within these walls, pressed down on her like a physical presence. Through the glass they could hear Jordan's laughter, bright and clear, cutting through the tension like a shaft of sunlight through storm clouds. The sound seemed to pierce something in Asher. His shoulders tensed, and his grip on the railing tightened even further. The revelation hung between them like a heavy curtain, changing everything and nothing all at once. The peaceful evening had transformed into something else entirely, filled with unspoken questions and uncomfortable truths. As Cynthia stood there, watching Asher struggle with his emotions, she wondered how many more secrets this mansion held, and how many more hearts would be broken before they all came to light. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 9, its deep chimes echoing through the quiet mansion. Cynthia sat in one of the plush armchairs in Asher's study, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Across from her, Asher paced back and forth, his usual composed demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. "I need to tell you everything," he finally said, stopping to lean against his desk. "You deserve to know the truth." Cynthia nodded silently, her heart pounding. The evening's revelation still rang in her ears, Jordan's innocent words changing everything she thought she knew about this household. "It was 5 years ago," Asher began, his voice heavy with regret. "I was different then, more focused on deals and acquisitions than on people. Harriet had just started working here, and we—" He paused, searching for the right words. "We became close." Cynthia watched as emotions played across his face, guilt, shame, and something that looked like longing. The usually confident businessman seemed smaller somehow, more human. "It wasn't meant to be anything serious," he continued. "We both knew that. But then Harriet discovered she was pregnant." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Cynthia had come to recognize as a sign of his distress. "She tried to tell me, but I was in the middle of a major business merger. I barely gave her time to speak." The sound of children's laughter drifted in from somewhere in the house. Jordan, probably playing before bedtime. The sound made Asher wince. By the time I realized what she'd been trying to tell me, she was gone. She'd taken a leave of absence, saying she needed to care for a sick relative. His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't question it. I didn't want to question it. I threw myself into work, convinced myself it was better this way." Cynthia set her cold tea aside. "But she came back," she said softly. Asher nodded. "A year later, with Jordan. She needed the job," she said. "And I—" He let out a bitter laugh. "I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done. So we made an unspoken agreement. She would stay on as my housekeeper, and we would never speak of the past. But Jordan is your son," Cynthia said, her voice tight with emotion. "How could you pretend otherwise?" "At first it seemed easier that way," Asher admitted, shame evident in his voice. "I told myself I was protecting him, protecting all of us, but watching him grow up, seeing him every day and maintaining this distance. He shook his head. It's been torture. Cynthia stood up, needing to move. The weight of this revelation pressed on her chest. Does anyone else know? No one, Asher replied. The staff probably suspects. They're not blind, but no one has ever said anything. And now? Cynthia asked, turning to face him. What happens now that Jordan seems to know the truth? Asher's shoulders slumped. I don't know. I've spent so long hiding from this, I don't know how to face it. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I've made such a mess of everything. Cynthia felt her own emotions churning. Sympathy for Jordan, anger at Asher's cowardice, and a deep sadness for the years of silence and pretense that had shaped this household. When I first came here, she said slowly, I thought I'd found a place where I belonged, someone who understood what it meant to be alone. She wrapped her arms around herself. But now I feel like an outsider again, watching a drama I had no part in. Cynthia. Asher moved toward her, reaching out but stopping short of touching her. You're not an outsider. If anything, you've brought light into this house. You've made me face things I've been running from for years. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing both the successful businessman and the frightened father, the man who had shown her kindness and the one who had hidden such a massive secret. I keep thinking about Jordan, she said softly, about how much love and joy he has to give, and how much he must want to share that love with his father. Asher's face crumpled slightly. I see him with Harriet, how natural they are together, how much she's given him. And I wonder if I even have the right to step into his life now, after all this time. You're his father, Cynthia said firmly. You've always been his father, whether you acknowledged it or not. The question is, what kind of father do you want to be now? The clock chimed the quarter hour, its sound filling the heavy silence between them. Outside the study window, the garden lay in darkness. The same garden where just hours ago, Jordan's innocent words had shattered their carefully maintained illusions. I want to be better, Asher whispered, his voice rough with emotion. For Jordan, for Harriet, for you. But I don't know how to begin. Cynthia felt tears pricking at her eyes. The truth is usually a good place to start, she said. No more secrets. No more pretending. They stood there in the quiet study, the weight of revelations and uncertain futures hanging between them. Cynthia could feel her world shifting, adjusting to accommodate this new reality. The man who had offered her sanctuary had his own deep wounds, his own struggles with family and belonging. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them both turn. Through the partially open door, they could see Harriet walking past with Jordan, heading toward his bedroom for the night. The little boy's sleepy voice drifted in. Good night, Daddy. Followed by silence. Asher closed his eyes, pain etched across his features. When he opened them again, there was a new resolve in his gaze. I need to talk to Harriet, he said quietly. We need to figure out how to move forward, how to be honest with Jordan. Cynthia nodded, feeling both part of and separate from this family drama. Yes, she agreed. You do. The grandfather clock continued its steady march through the night, marking time as secrets came to light and lives hung in the balance of truth finally spoken. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Cynthia stirred her coffee, lost in thought. The newspaper lay on the counter, unopened. She couldn't bring herself to look at it, knowing what she might find. The events of the past few days had turned her world upside down, and now it seemed the whole city was talking about them. A car door slammed outside, followed by the clicking of cameras. Cynthia peeked through the curtains to see 3 photographers camping out by the front gate. Their long lenses pointed toward the house like accusatory fingers. "Miss Cynthia." Harriet's quiet voice made her jump. "Perhaps you should step away from the window." Cynthia turned to face the maid. No, not just the maid anymore. How strange to look at Harriet now, knowing she was Jordan's mother, knowing her history with Asher. The woman's face remained calm, but Cynthia could see the strain around her eyes. "How do you deal with it?" Cynthia asked softly. "All these people, all these stories?" Harriet moved to the counter, methodically wiping it down. "I've had years of practice keeping secrets," she said, "though I never expected them to come out quite like this." The morning paper's headline screamed, "Billionaire's Secret Love Child Scandal." Beneath it was a grainy photo of Asher entering the house, and a smaller one of Harriet with Jordan leaving school. Someone had drawn red circles and arrows, connecting them like pieces of evidence in a crime. "They're calling you his mistress," Cynthia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're saying such horrible things." Harriet's hands stilled on the counter. People will always talk. What matters is protecting Jordan. As if summoned by his name, the boy's footsteps thundered down the stairs. He burst into the kitchen, full of 8-year-old energy, seemingly oblivious to the chaos his innocent words had unleashed. "Mom, can I go to Tommy's house after school today?" Jordan asked, reaching for the cereal box. Harriet exchanged a quick glance with Cynthia. "Not today, sweetheart. We need to stay home for a little while." "But why?" Jordan's face fell. "Tommy's got a new video game." "Jordan." Asher's voice cut through the kitchen. He stood in the doorway, looking exhausted. His usually immaculate suit was slightly rumpled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "There are some people outside who want to take your picture. We need to keep you safe inside for now." Jordan looked confused. "Because you're my dad?" The silence in the kitchen grew thick. Cynthia watched as Asher struggled with his response, saw the pain flash across his face. "Yes," he finally said, "because I'm your father, and I should have told you that a long time ago." The sound of more cars pulling up outside drew their attention. Asher moved to the window, his jaw tightening. "There are news vans now," he said grimly. Cynthia's phone buzzed with another notification. She'd been getting them constantly. Messages from reporters, friend requests from strangers, links to articles about the mysterious woman living in Asher Knight's mansion. "Mr. Knight." One of the security staff appeared at the door. "They're requesting a statement. The story's gone national." Asher ran a hand through his hair. "Tell them no comment, and increase security at the gates. No one gets in or out without clearance." Cynthia felt her chest tighten. The mansion that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed more like a prison. She watched as Jordan finished his breakfast, blissfully unaware of how his world was about to change. "I need to make some calls," Asher announced. "Harriet, please keep Jordan inside today. I'll have his school send his assignments." He paused, looking at Cynthia. "We should talk later." After he left, Cynthia helped Harriet clean up breakfast. The sounds of shouting reporters drifted through the windows, making her stomach churn. "You know," Harriet said quietly, "you don't have to stay. You're not bound to this mess." Cynthia looked at her hands, gripping the edge of the sink. "I don't know where else to go," she admitted. "And besides, running away feels like giving up." Throughout the day, the circus outside only grew. Cynthia watched from various windows as more reporters arrived, as social media exploded with theories and judgments. Some painted Harriet as a gold digger, others portrayed Asher as a heartless billionaire who'd abandoned his child. A few particularly cruel articles suggested Cynthia was his latest mistress, questioning her sudden appearance in his life. By evening, Cynthia felt suffocated. She found herself in the garden, the only place she could escape the constant scrutiny. The high walls kept her hidden from the cameras, but she could still hear the chaos beyond. "I'm sorry." Ash's voice startled her. He stood a few feet away, his tie loosened, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "I never meant for any of this to touch you. Did you think it would stay secret forever?" Cynthia asked, not unkindly. "That Jordan would never want to know his father? I thought I was protecting him." Asher moved closer, sinking onto a garden bench. "Protecting all of us. But I was just being a coward." A helicopter buzzed overhead, its searchlight sweeping the grounds. Cynthia flinched at the invasion. "What happens now?" she asked, wrapping her arms around herself. "My lawyers are working on damage control. We'll release a statement, try to get ahead of the story." He looked at her intently. "But Cynthia, you don't have to be part of this. I can arrange for you to stay somewhere else, somewhere private." The offer hung between them. Cynthia thought about her family, who had rejected her for being unable to have children. Now here she was, caught in the middle of someone else's family drama, surrounded by wealth but feeling more alone than ever. "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. "For me to leave?" Asher stood up, taking a step toward her. "No," he said firmly. "That's the last thing I want. But I can't ask you to endure this circus. It's not fair to you." From inside the house, they could hear Jordan laughing at something on TV, the sound carrying through the open windows. It was such a normal, innocent sound in the midst of their chaos. "Life isn't fair," Cynthia said, thinking of all the twists and turns that had brought her here. "But running away doesn't make it better." The searchlight passed over them again, and they both instinctively stepped deeper into the shadows of the garden. In that moment of shared concealment, Cynthia realized that despite everything, the scandal, the judgment, the invasion of privacy, she wasn't ready to give up on this strange, broken family she'd stumbled into. The media frenzy continued to build outside the walls, but in that quiet garden, surrounded by blooming flowers and evening shadows, Cynthia made her choice to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because sometimes family meant standing together, even when the whole world was watching. The morning headlines screamed accusations across every newspaper and television screen. Cynthia sat in the kitchen, her untouched coffee growing cold as she scrolled through her phone. Each new article felt like another brick adding to the weight on her shoulders. Billionaire's secret love child scandal. Asher Knight's hidden family revealed. Who is the mysterious woman in Knight's mansion? Her hands trembled as she set the phone face down on the marble counter. Through the kitchen window, she could see reporters camped outside the gates, their cameras ready like weapons. The mansion's security team patrolled the perimeter, but they couldn't keep out the whispers and speculation that seeped through every crack. Harriet moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing Jordan's lunch. The tension between them had grown thick enough to cut with a knife. Cynthia watched as the maid carefully packed Jordan's favorite sandwich into his Spider-Man lunchbox, even though he wouldn't be going to school today. "He's going to ask questions soon," Cynthia said softly, breaking the silence. "About why he can't go outside, why people are taking pictures." Harriet's hands stilled for a moment. "He's already asking. What am I supposed to tell him? That his father kept him a secret for 7 years because he was ashamed?" The bitterness in Harriet's voice made Cynthia flinch. "Is that really why? Did Asher tell you that's why he stayed away?" "Asher Knight doesn't need to tell me anything. His actions speak loudly enough." Harriet closed the lunchbox with more force than necessary. "And now you're caught in his web, too." The words stung because they held a grain of truth. Cynthia had been so grateful for Asher's kindness, so touched by his apparent vulnerability, that she'd overlooked the red flags. Why had he really taken her in that day? Was it genuine compassion, or was she just another way for him to feel better about himself? Heavy footsteps announced Asher's arrival before he appeared in the doorway, his usual impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much. "The board wants an emergency meeting," he announced, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. "I'll be gone most of the day. Running away to the office while we deal with your mess." Harriet's words were sharp enough to draw blood. Asher's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to protect this family's future. The company's stock is dropping, and if I don't handle this properly, everything I've built could collapse." "Your empire," Harriet scoffed. "That's all you've ever cared about." Cynthia watched the exchange, feeling like an intruder in someone else's drama. But when Asher's eyes finally met hers, seeking understanding or support, she looked away. The weight of unspoken questions pressed against her chest. After Asher left, the house felt even more suffocating. Cynthia wandered through the rooms, touching familiar objects that suddenly seemed foreign. In the library, where she'd spent so many peaceful hours reading, she now saw only hiding places for secrets. What else wasn't Asher telling her? Jordan found her there, clutching his tablet. "Miss Cynthia, why are people saying mean things about my daddy on the internet?" Her heart cracked at his innocent question. She patted the seat beside her on the window bench, and he climbed up, snuggling close. "Sometimes," she began carefully, "grown-ups say things without knowing the whole story. They make guesses and assumptions that can hurt people's feelings. But why don't they just ask us? We could tell them the truth." Out of the mouths of babes. Cynthia wrapped an arm around his small shoulders, wondering the same thing. Why hadn't Asher ever just told the truth? As the day wore on, more revelations emerged online. Someone had dug up old photos of Harriet working at Asher's previous company. Another source claimed there had been a substantial payment made around the time of Jordan's birth. Each new piece of information felt like another crack in the foundation of trust Cynthia had been building. By evening, when Asher finally returned home, Cynthia had packed and unpacked her suitcase 3 times. Each time, something stopped her. The memory of Jordan's laugh, the way Asher had looked at her in the garden, the thought of returning to a world where she had no one. She found Asher in his study, tie undone, staring at his laptop screen. "Are there more secrets?" she asked without preamble. "More things I should know before they show up in tomorrow's headlines?" He looked up, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "Cynthia, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't try to smooth this over with careful words. I need the truth, Asher, all of it, because right now I feel like I'm drowning in other people's stories about who you are, and I don't know which version to believe. I'm still the same person you've gotten to know these past weeks," he said quietly. "Are you? Because the man I thought I knew wouldn't hide his own son. He wouldn't let the mother of his child work as his maid while he lived in luxury." Her voice cracked. "He wouldn't let me start caring about him without telling me the whole truth." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Outside, camera flashes lit up the darkening sky like lightning, documenting their pain for the world to see. "I'm not just another chapter in your story of redemption, Asher," Cynthia continued, her hands clenched at her sides. "I'm not here to make you feel better about your mistakes, or to help you build a perfect family image. I thought—" She swallowed hard. "I thought we had something real, something honest." Asher stood, moving toward her, but she stepped back. The hurt in his eyes matched her own, but she couldn't let herself be swayed by it. Not this time. "Give me a reason to stay," she whispered. Give me something true to hold on to." But as she looked at him, she saw the same walls going up that had kept his secrets for so long, the same protective instincts that had led him to hide Jordan, to keep Harriet at arm's length, to build this gilded cage they all now lived in. The weight of it all, the scandal, the secrets, the uncertainty, pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. She thought of her family, who had thrown her away because she couldn't give them what they wanted. Was she any different to Asher? Just another piece in his complicated life that he could rearrange or remove when it became inconvenient? Yet even as these doubts plagued her, she remembered the quiet moments they'd shared, the way he'd looked at her like she mattered, the feeling of finally belonging somewhere. Walking away would mean giving up on more than just Asher. It would mean giving up on the first real connection she'd felt since her world fell apart. She stood there, caught between staying and leaving, between hope and fear, while outside the cameras flashed and the world waited to see what would happen next in the saga of Asher Knight's complicated life. The evening shadows stretched across Asher's study as Cynthia gathered her courage. Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat a reminder of what she stood to lose. The mansion felt smaller tonight, more confining, as if the walls themselves were closing in around them. Through the window, she could still see the occasional flash of cameras, hungry vultures waiting for their next story. "We need to talk," she said firmly, closing the heavy oak door behind her. "And this time, I need everything. No more half-truths, no more careful omissions." Asher sat behind his massive desk, his tie loosened and jacket discarded. He looked older tonight, the weight of his secrets etched in the lines around his eyes. "Sit down, please," he said softly, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. Cynthia shook her head. "I've spent enough time sitting quietly while others decided my fate. I'll stand." The silence stretched between them like a physical thing, full of all the words they hadn't said. Outside, a car door slammed, and voices carried faintly through the window. The world was waiting, but in here, time seemed to stand still. "When did it start?" Cynthia asked. "With Harriet. I want to know everything." Asher's fingers drummed against his desk, a nervous habit she'd never seen before. 5 years ago, he said finally. She was new to the company, working in the accounting department. He paused, searching for words. "I was different then. Colder, more focused on acquisitions than actual human connections. And Jordan. I didn't know about him at first." Asher stood up, pacing to the window. "The affair ended after 3 months. Harriet resigned, and I thought that was the end of it. I didn't find out about Jordan until he was already 2 years old." Cynthia wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears. "How could you keep him a secret? He's your son." "Because I was ashamed." Asher's voice cracked. Not of him, never of him, but of what I'd done, of how I'd treated Harriet. When she came back, asking for a job, I thought I could make it right by providing for them both, even if I didn't deserve to be in their lives. "So you made her your maid?" Cynthia's voice rose. "You kept your own child at arm's length?" "I was a coward," he admitted, turning to face her. His eyes were red-rimmed, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I told myself I was protecting them from the media, from the scandal. But really, I was protecting myself from having to face my mistakes." Cynthia moved closer, her anger warring with her need to understand. "And what about me? Was I just another mistake? Another person you could keep in your life without really letting in?" "No." Asher's response was immediate, almost desperate. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, reaching for her hands. This time, she let him take them. "You're the first real thing I've felt in years. You walked into my life with nothing but a suitcase and your dignity, and you made me remember what it feels like to care about someone more than myself." His hands were warm around hers, trembling slightly. "I need you, Cynthia, not as an escape or a distraction. I need your strength, your compassion, the way you see through all my defenses to the person I could be." Tears spilled down Cynthia's cheeks. "I'm scared, Asher. My whole life, people have decided I wasn't enough. My family threw me away because I couldn't give them what they wanted. How do I know you won't do the same?" "Because you've already given me everything I need," he said softly. "You showed Jordan kindness without knowing who he was. You treated Harriet with respect when you could have been jealous or cruel. You've brought light and warmth back into this house, and I—" He swallowed hard. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying. Cynthia's heart seemed to stop and race at the same time. "I don't want perfect," he continued. "I don't want easy. I want real and messy and true. I want to build something with you that isn't based on secrets or shame. I want to be the man you believe I can be." Cynthia looked up at him, seeing past the wealthy exterior to the vulnerable man beneath. "I need to know that you're going to fight for this," she whispered. "That when things get hard, and they will get hard, you won't retreat behind your walls again." "I promise," he said, reaching up to wipe away her tears. "No more walls, no more secrets. Whatever comes next, we face it together." She leaned into his touch, letting out a shaky breath. "I'm willing to trust you," she said softly. "Not because you're perfect, but because you're finally being honest about your imperfections." Asher pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. She could feel his heart beating against her cheek, strong and steady. Outside, the world continued to buzz with speculation and judgment, but in here, they had found something real, something worth fighting for. "We'll figure it out," he murmured into her hair. "All of it. Jordan, Harriet, the media. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Cynthia nodded, feeling the tension begin to ease from her shoulders. She wasn't naive enough to think everything would be easy, but for the first time since her world had fallen apart, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Asher's study, casting long shadows across the antique desk, where several newspapers lay spread out. Each one bore similar headlines about the mysterious child at the Knight mansion. Asher stood by the window, his shoulders tense as he looked out over the manicured gardens where Jordan played with his toy trucks. Cynthia watched from the doorway, her heart aching for both father and son. "You know what needs to be done," she said softly. Asher turned, his face lined with worry. "The moment I go public, everything changes. Not just for me, but for Jordan and Harriet too. The media will tear into their lives like vultures." "They're already doing that," Cynthia pointed out, stepping into the room. "At least this way you control the narrative. You get to tell your truth, not their version of it." A knock at the door interrupted them. Harriet stood there, her usual composed demeanor slightly shaken. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are more reporters at the gate. They're asking about Jordan." Asher ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Cynthia had come to recognize as a sign of his internal struggle. "Harriet, please, sit down. We need to talk about this." Harriet perched nervously on the edge of an armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Cynthia moved to stand behind her, offering silent support. "I think it's time we tell the truth," Asher said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "All of it, about us, about Jordan. No more hiding." Harriet's eyes widened. "Are you sure? This could affect everything. Your business, your reputation." "None of that matters anymore," Asher replied, glancing at Cynthia. I've spent too long hiding from my responsibilities, protecting my image at the cost of what's right. Jordan deserves better. You both do." Tears welled up in Harriet's eyes. "I never wanted to cause trouble. That's why I left all those years ago. When I came back, I thought keeping quiet was the best thing for everyone." Cynthia placed a gentle hand on Harriet's shoulder. "You were both trying to protect each other, and Jordan. But sometimes protection can look a lot like shame." Asher nodded, moving to kneel in front of Harriet. "I'm sorry for every time I made you feel like our son was something to be ashamed of. He's not. He's perfect. And it's time I started being the father he deserves." A small sob escaped Harriet's throat as years of pent-up emotion finally broke free. "He asks about you, you know. When he sees other children with their fathers, he doesn't understand why you're so close yet so far away." "That ends today," Asher said firmly. He stood up and walked to his desk, pressing the intercom button. "Sarah, please contact my PR team. Set up a press conference for tomorrow morning." The next 24 hours passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Asher's PR team worked through the night, crafting statements and preparing responses to every possible question. Harriet spent hours with Jordan, trying to explain in terms a 5-year-old could understand that things were about to change. Cynthia found Asher in his study late that night, staring at an old photograph of himself and Harriet. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. For the first time in years, I'm completely certain about something. I just wish I'd done this sooner." "You're doing it now," she reminded him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "That's what matters." The morning of the press conference arrived bright and clear. The mansion's front lawn had been transformed into a media circus, with cameras and reporters jockeying for position. Asher stood at the podium, his usual confident demeanor tempered by genuine emotion. "5 years ago," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "I made a choice that would affect many lives. I chose to hide from my responsibilities as a father. I chose image over honesty, fear over love. Today, I'm here to correct that mistake." The cameras clicked frantically as he continued. "Jordan Knight is my son. His mother, Harriet Williams, and I had a brief relationship that ended before either of us knew she was pregnant. When she returned to work for me years later, we chose to keep our past private. That was wrong. Our son deserves to be acknowledged, celebrated, and loved openly." Cynthia watched from the sidelines as Asher spoke, her heart swelling with pride. She could see the moment the weight began lifting from his shoulders, years of guilt and shame melting away with each honest word. "I know this revelation will spark speculation and judgment," he continued. "I accept that, but I ask that you respect the privacy of my son and his mother. They didn't choose this spotlight. I'm the one who needs to answer for my past choices." As he finished speaking, Harriet stepped forward with Jordan. The little boy looked confused by all the attention but smiled when Asher knelt down to his level. "Hey, buddy," Asher said softly, though the microphones picked up every word. "Want to wave hello to everyone?" Jordan waved enthusiastically, drawing chuckles from the crowd. The photographers went wild, capturing the moment Asher Knight publicly embraced his son for the first time. Later that evening, after the reporters had gone and Jordan was tucked into bed, the 3 adults sat in the kitchen. The atmosphere was different now, lighter somehow, despite the chaos they knew would follow. "The board of directors is going to have questions," Asher said, but there was no regret in his voice. "Let them ask," Cynthia replied. "You've done nothing wrong except wait too long to do what's right." Harriet nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Jordan hasn't stopped smiling since you called him son in front of everyone. He keeps saying he wants to show his friends the videos of his daddy talking about him." Asher reached across the table and squeezed Harriet's hand. I know we can't erase the past 5 years, but I promise you both, things will be different now. We'll figure out how to be proper parents to him, together. And I'll be here to help. Cynthia added, Jordan deserves to have as many people loving him as possible. The headlines the next day were predictably sensational. Billionaire's secret love child revealed. Night air hidden in plain sight. But beneath the shocking headlines, there was a story of redemption, of a man choosing love over pride, truth over convenience. Asher's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Board members, business partners, social contacts, all demanding explanations. But as he watched Jordan playing with his trucks in the garden, now free to call him Daddy whenever he wanted, he knew he'd made the right choice. Harriet, too, seemed to stand taller, no longer carrying the burden of their secret. She and Asher began having long conversations about Jordan's future, their past mistakes, and how to move forward as parents. It wasn't always easy, but it was honest. Cynthia observed these changes with quiet joy, seeing how truth, even when difficult, had the power to heal old wounds and create new beginnings. She understood now why she had been brought into their lives, not just to find her own healing, but to help this fractured family find their way back to each other. The days following the press conference brought a gradual shift in the mansion's atmosphere. While camera crews still lingered outside the gates, their numbers dwindled with each passing day. Inside, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Cynthia found herself watching Asher's interactions with Jordan, noting how the businessman's sharp edges softened when his son was around. One afternoon, she observed them playing with building blocks in the living room, Jordan's laughter echoing through the halls. "Hiya, Daddy!" Jordan squealed as Asher carefully stacked another block on their towering creation. "Any higher, and we'll need a building permit." Asher joked, his usual stern expression replaced by a genuine smile. From the doorway, Harriet appeared with a tray of snacks. Her eyes met Cynthia's, and they shared a knowing look. The healing was happening, slowly but surely. Later that evening, Cynthia and Harriet sat in the kitchen, sharing tea and conversations that had become their nightly ritual. "I never thought I'd see the day," Harriet admitted, warming her hands around her mug. "Asher being a real father to Jordan. It still feels like a dream sometimes." Cynthia reached across the table and squeezed Harriet's hand. "You carried this secret for so long. How are you really doing with everything?" Harriet's eyes welled with tears. "It's strange. There's relief, yes, but also, I don't know, I spent 5 years being everything to Jordan. Now I'm learning to share him, to trust that Asher won't disappear again." "That must be scary," Cynthia said softly. "It is, but seeing Jordan so happy." Harriet wiped her eyes. "That makes it worth it." Their friendship had deepened in unexpected ways. Harriet began sharing stories of Jordan's early years, and Cynthia found herself opening up about her own pain of infertility and family rejection. "You know," Harriet said one day while they folded laundry together, "being a mother isn't just about giving birth. It's about love. And you've got so much love to give, Cynthia." Those words struck deep in Cynthia's heart. She realized that while her family had seen her inability to have children as a failure, here she was, helping to nurture and support a different kind of family. The relationship between Cynthia and Asher evolved too, growing deeper as they faced the challenges together. One evening, after Jordan had gone to bed, they sat in the garden. "Sometimes I wonder if you regret staying," Asher said quietly. "This isn't exactly the simple life you signed up for." Cynthia turned to face him. "When my family kicked me out, I thought I'd lost everything. But being here, being part of this complicated, beautiful mess. It's shown me who I really am. I'm not just the woman who couldn't have children. I'm someone who can help heal a family." Asher took her hand, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You've helped heal me too, you know? I was so afraid of facing my past, of admitting my mistakes, but you showed me that it's never too late to make things right." Their newfound family dynamic wasn't without its challenges. There were awkward moments, misunderstandings, and times when old fears threatened to surface. But they faced each obstacle together, learning to communicate and trust one another. Jordan, in his innocent way, helped bridge many gaps. He'd grab Cynthia's hand along with his mother's when crossing the street, or demand that both Harriet and Asher read him bedtime stories. His love didn't recognize the complicated adult boundaries they sometimes struggled with. As weeks passed, Cynthia found herself settling into a role she never expected, not replacing anyone, but adding her own unique presence to their family tapestry. She helped Jordan with his homework, shared cooking duties with Harriet, and supported Asher as he learned to balance his business responsibilities with fatherhood. One afternoon, while watching Jordan play soccer in the backyard with both his parents cheering him on, Cynthia felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. Her inability to have children had once seemed like the end of her story. Instead, it had led her here, to a place where she could give and receive love in ways she never imagined possible. She was more than enough, exactly as she was. The realization brought tears to her eyes, not tears of sadness this time, but of gratitude and joy. The autumn breeze rustled through the garden as Cynthia watched Jordan chase falling leaves. Her heart swelled with a love she never thought possible. This wasn't the family she had imagined for herself, but it was perfect in its own wonderful way. "Got you!" Jordan exclaimed, catching a golden leaf mid-air. He ran to show it to her, his eyes bright with excitement. "Look, Cynthia, it's shaped like a heart." She pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and childhood innocence. "It sure is, sweetheart, just like the love we all share." Asher appeared from his study, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. The sight of him still made her heart skip, but now it was deeper than attraction. It was understanding, trust, and genuine love. "I just got off the phone with the realtor," he said, joining them on the garden bench. "The beach house we looked at last week. It's ours if we want it." Cynthia's eyes widened. They had talked about a vacation home, somewhere they could all escape to, make new memories together. "Really? Really?" He smiled, taking her hand. "I thought it could be our fresh start. All of us." Harriet, who had been watering the flowers nearby, looked over with a gentle smile. The tension that had once existed between them had transformed into a unique friendship, built on mutual respect and understanding. "We could spend summers there," Cynthia mused, already imagining lazy beach days and sunset walks. "Jordan would love that." "I want to build sandcastles," Jordan chimed in, climbing onto Asher's lap. Asher wrapped one arm around his son and kept hold of Cynthia's hand with the other. "I've spent so many years running from my past," he said quietly. "But now, with you both, with this family we've created, I'm finally at peace." Cynthia squeezed his hand, feeling tears of joy prick at her eyes. The woman who had once stood alone on a cold sidewalk, rejected and lost, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had found her purpose in the most unexpected way. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" she whispered. "More than okay," Asher replied, pulling her close. "We're going to be extraordinary." The community center buzzed with excitement as families gathered for the Open Hearts, Open Homes event. Cynthia stood at the podium, her hand intertwined with Asher's, while Jordan sat in the front row next to Harriet. Behind them, their newly adopted twins, 6-year-old Sarah and 8-year-old Michael, played quietly with their coloring books. 2 years ago, I thought my life was over. Cynthia began, her voice strong and clear. I was told I wasn't enough because I couldn't have children, but life had other plans. She smiled at her family. Love doesn't always come in the package we expect. The audience listened intently as she shared their journey through the foster care system, how they had met Sarah and Michael, and how their hearts had instantly connected. Asher stepped forward to join her at the microphone. When we first met the twins, he said, his voice thick with emotion, they reminded me so much of Jordan. Every child deserves a chance at happiness, at family. The event had drawn dozens of families interested in foster care and adoption. Resource tables lined the walls, staffed by social workers and family advocates. Cynthia and Asher had funded the entire initiative, determined to help other families find the same joy they had discovered. Second chances aren't just for children, Cynthia continued. They're for parents too, for anyone who's ever felt lost or rejected. Love has a way of finding us when we least expect it. Sarah ran up to the stage, tugging at Cynthia's dress. Mama, can I tell them about our family too? Cynthia lifted her daughter onto her hip, and together they faced the crowd. Their story of healing, hope, and unconditional love echoed through the room, touching hearts and changing lives. After Sarah's heartfelt moment at the podium, Cynthia and Asher shared a knowing glance. Their journey had come full circle. The community centre, filled with hopeful families and dedicated social workers, represented everything they'd fought to achieve. Michael joined his sister on stage, and Jordan wasn't far behind. The sight of all 3 children together, biological and adopted, brought tears to Cynthia's eyes. Harriet watched from her seat, a gentle smile on her face, having found her own peace in this unconventional family. Look at us now, Asher whispered, his arm around Cynthia's waist. Who would have thought that rainy day when I found you would lead to all of this? The event wound down as families mingled, sharing stories and dreams. Some filled out preliminary paperwork for fostering, while others exchanged contact information with support groups. The walls that had once divided them, wealth, status, biology, had crumbled in the face of something far more powerful. Love. As they gathered their things to leave, Cynthia looked at her family. Sarah and Michael chatted animatedly with Jordan about their upcoming weekend plans. Harriet helped pack up the remaining informational materials, now comfortable in her role as both employee and family member. And Asher, her rock through it all, stood beside her, transformed from the guarded businessman she'd first met into a man who had learned to open his heart completely. Their story had become more than just a tale of personal redemption. It was a beacon of hope for others who felt lost or unwanted. Together, they had proven that family wasn't defined by blood or circumstance, but by the choice to love unconditionally, to forgive past mistakes, and to believe in second chances. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.